Hi, welcome to our weekly devotional. Thank you for spending time with us each week as we try to study the Word of God and apply it to our lives, specifically for that day. So today we're going to continue on with our study of Hosea, and today we'll be in Hosea chapter 4. And Hosea chapter 4 doesn't seem like the most hopeful prophecy. At this point, the prophet is... you might say he's letting them have it with both barrels, with both guns going right now. And so even in the midst of such a judgmental chapter here from the prophet, we do find an element of hope at the end. And so that's where we're going to end. But we're going to start with really some of the complaints that God has against the people in chapter 4. So we're going to start in Hosea chapter 4, and we are going to begin in verse 8 of chapter 4. And it says this, it says, "When the people bring their sin offerings, the priests get fed." So the priests are glad when the people sin. "And what the priests do, the people do also. So now I will punish both priests and people for their wicked deeds. They will eat and still be hungry. They will play the prostitute and gain nothing from it, for they have deserted the Lord to worship other gods. Wine has robbed my people of their understanding. They ask a piece of wood for advice. They think a stick can tell them the future. Longing after idols has made them foolish. They have played the prostitute, serving other gods and deserting their God." We're going to pause right there because I think you get the picture from that, and just kind of talk about a couple things in that section before we move on to the end here. So in verse 8, you're introduced to this idea that the priests get fed whenever the people sin. And so what that has behind it is this kind of cultural gap that we don't see in the 21st century, but that people at that time would know well. And that's that when the priests perform their duties at the temple, when people bring something for sacrifice, for example, a sin sacrifice, there is a part that gets set aside for the priests to eat. Instead of receiving a piece of land like the rest of the tribes did, the tribe of Levi, the priests, were promised priesthood, and so as a part of the sacrificial system, they were cared for through those sacrifices. So what the prophet's pointing out here is that the priests don't really care what the people do, because the more they sin, the more stuff they get, the more food they get. So it puts these priests in a unique conundrum where they're benefiting from the wickedness of the people. And that's exactly what the prophet's pointing out, is that this whole system is not working right. It's not honoring God in the way that they're doing this, because they're more concerned about their own welfare here. And so we see then again, after verse 11 talks about how wine has robbed my people of their understanding, he talks about they're asking a piece of wood for advice. They think a stick can tell them the future. And that kind of is another cultural gap that we have between that time period and where we live now. They had wooden idols that they would maybe consult for some things. They weren't supposed to do this, but evidently they were. And in archaeology, we find that even throughout the land of Israel, they had plenty of carved idols, both stone and wood and different things. And so this is the prophet pointing out that you're going to, ridiculous idols that have no power. They're just a stick. In other words, he's pointing out the silliness of this act. And so we get really the full picture here that these people are not following God. These people are not, even the leaders are not concerned about pleasing the Lord. They're concerned about advancing themselves. And that's really where the whole problem is that this attitude has pervaded the entire nation. Kind of makes us think about our circumstances today, and trying to make sure that attitude does not pervade our lives, that we are not looking out for ourselves more than we're looking out for God. So that should be one thing that we gain from this, is that we don't want to be like these people. We don't want to be like the nation of of Israel was. The whole point of this book is that they've been, the nation of Israel has been like an unfaithful wife. And we see that playing out here as well. But we do see an element of hope. And it takes a little bit of a turn in verse 15 of chapter 4. Verse 15 of chapter 4 says this. It says, "Though you, Israel, are a prostitute, may Judah not be guilty of such things." So the people of Judah in the southern kingdom politically were separate from Israel at this time. They had a separate king. And we see kind of a theme throughout the Old Testament that Judah is going to be the way that God preserves his people moving forward. We know Jesus was from Judah, for the line of Judah. And so we see this sort of play out. And we see some hope here that Judah isn't going to be like this. And so he implores the people of Judah a little bit here in the second half of verse 15. "Do not join the false worship at Gilgal or Beth Aven." And a lot of people think that Beth Aven is kind of a word play on Bethel. Gilgal and Bethel were kind of some shrines that they had set up as places to worship in Israel. And they were supposed to worship in Jerusalem, remember, in Judah, but they had set these up because politically it was better for them if the people stayed there. Well, here the prophet is kind of calling out that false worship by calling Bethel Beth Aven. Instead of house of God, Bethel, he's calling it Beth Aven, house of sin. And so we see that really vivid picture from the prophet. And then he goes on to say, "And do not take oaths there in the Lord's name." So he's telling the people of Judah, don't have anything to do with the worship that you see going on in Israel, that false worship. Don't have anything to do with that. May Judah not be guilty of such things. And we know that later on in history, in 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel is overthrown, but Judah prevails. Judah continues on, and so they have the favor from God at that point. And so I should point out, this is a really big deal politically, because the nation of Israel was considered to be extremely, just way more powerful than the southern kingdom, Judah. And so if you were just looking at the time of Hosea at a map, or looking at which kingdom looked more powerful, had better buildings, whatever, you would think Israel would be the one that would endure. But that's not God's plan. And we see it play out that God has his hand in history, and those who are faithful to him remain. And so that's why Judah, according to the text, prevails a little longer, because they're faithful to God in this and not guilty of these same things. And so there's an element of hope there for you and I, that if we, even if we live in a culture that is got this attitude of putting themselves first and not caring about the things of God, if we live in a culture like that, but we are still faithful to God, and we do put him first, and we don't take part in that false worship, in that prideful self-interest sort of worship, if we remain true to the word of the Lord, as the people of Judah did, you and I can still hold on to those promises and still triumph over sin in our lives. And we can experience that life and that fullness from God, even though we live in a difficult time, in a difficult political situation. Okay? So I think that has hope for you and I today, and I hope that that is something that you can take joy in today, and that you can remember, and that will help you feel closer to the Lord today. So again, that's the words from Hosea chapter 4. Next week we will look at Hosea chapter 5, and we would love to have you join us online right here on YouTube or Facebook on Sunday mornings at 9:45 for our live stream. We would also love to have you in person if you can make that. We even have a women's Bible study that takes place online at 6:30 Central on Wednesday evenings. And so if that's something you'd like to be a part of, please let us know. Email us through the form on our website, greenwood.church, and let us know about that. Y'all have a wonderful week.